0 hours since the legend vanished into the desert sun. The tarmac holds secrets that 50 years of intelligence could never uncover. The most wanted man on Earth did not surrender with a bang. He was delivered like a package wrapped in silence and betrayal. The algorithm of survival relies on a single variable called trust. When that variable flips to 0, the entire equation of power collapses. He was a ghost running an empire. No recorded voice, no recent photos, just a shadow that moved through the Sierra Madre. While his partners rotted in supermax cells, El Mayo remained free. He perfected the art of vanishing while others chased the spotlight. The trap was not made of steel but of a familiar face, and a glass of drugged tequila offered by a god. Every 90 seconds, a cell signal can pinpoint a location. El Mayo knew this, yet he ignored the human signal of deceit. The meeting spot was a one-story ranch house chosen for its isolation. It was a geometric cage, disguised as a business opportunity. Inside, fruit and water sat ready for a cordial chat. It was the stage for a play that would end in. In the next room, 6 armed men waited for the signal. Their only job was to ensure the legend never walked out. "Let me show you the blueprints," the godson said. It was the final lure. The social engineering exploit that bypassed 50. Trust is the only vulnerability that cannot be patched. He walked into the room because family does not betray family. He was wrong. 90 seconds of chaos transformed a mastermind into cargo. The legend was hogtied on a dirty floor, gasping. They hauled him up like freight and covered him with a tarp. The most powerful man in Mexico was now just luggage. An illegal flight across the border relying on low altitude and luck. The package was in the air before the alarm rang. Crossing the international line at 500 feet. The ghost was leaving his mountains for a cell he would never leave. The Americans were waiting. The cherry on top of a decades-long investigation was about to be served by Joaquin. Surrendered voluntarily, trading a godfather for his own freedom. A cold calculation that reshuffled the impossible had occurred. The legend who outsmarted everyone was undone by a simple lie about real estate and family. 50 years of invincibility undone by one phone call. He fell into the only trap he never saw coming, his own. Back home, the silence was broken by the sound of rifles being loaded. The betrayal triggered a chain reaction of destruction. The syndicate, once a machine of cohesion, began to tear itself apart. Loyalty was now a luxury no one could afford. The game was unwinnable by the old rules. Joaquin reshuffled the deck, but the price of entry was his own soul. In August 2025, the legend finally spoke. He admitted to decades of crimes, a final surrender in a room with time caught up to the man who thought he had outrun it. The chapter of the Mayo Chapo alliance has definitively closed. Other narcos will rise, but the foundation is broken. Trust was the one crack in the armor that no violence could. He outsmarted the world for half a century, only to be outsmarted by the one thing he allowed himself to feel. The architect of the Sinaloa syndicate understood that power is not about being seen, but about controlling the void of information. Intelligence agencies spent decades searching for a single recorded phone call, yet El Mayo maintained absolute radio silence across. His survival protocol was clinical, relying on a technical loophole that rendered modern satellite triangulation completely useless against his. While his partners flaunted wealth, El Mayo operated like a ghost in the machine, rotating through a sequence of mountain hideouts. This methodology created a black hole in the DEA's database, forcing them to rely on a single grainy image from 19. However, the technical landscape shifted when a new generation embraced the digital noise of social media, and the Chapitos traded the old man's patient logistics for rapid expansion and synthetic manufacturing, which generated an unavoidable heat map for authorities. This friction between analog wisdom and digital recklessness created the perfect conditions for a mathematical betrayal that Joaquin Guzman Lopez realized that the old rules of loyalty were failing. Under the pressure of modern global surveillance, he calculated that the only way to secure his own future was to trade the syndicate's most valuable and invisible. The betrayal was not just a personal act, but a strategic liquidation of an outdated empire to survive a new era. By leveraging the one thing El Mayo still trusted, Joaquin exploited a human vulnerability that no encryption or radio silence could. The legend who outsmarted the world for half a century finally succumbed to the cold logic of a new, ruthless generation. Every 90 seconds, the invisible shield of the mountains was pierced by a technical necessity that the new generation. The logistics of the drug trade are a mathematical puzzle where the variables of trust and time. If in the end, the most sophisticated evasion tactics cannot defend against a partner who decides the game is no longer. The fall of El Mayo marks the end of the analog narco, replaced by a system that prioritizes data over tradition. Justice is often just the final calculation in a series of betrayals that the world calls a successful law enforcement. The desert hides many secrets, but it cannot hide a man who has been traded for a chance at a new life. The Americans didn't just catch a man. They inherited the technical blueprints of a 5-decade-old. The price of the legend's freedom was paid in the currency of information, a trade that bankrupts the future of the syndicate. When the foundation of trust is removed, the entire structure of the empire collapses under the weight of its own history. El Mayo's ghost still haunts the mountains, but his methodology has been rewritten by the cold algorithms of the modern age. The throne of the Sinaloa Syndicate is no longer a seat of power but a target for the next generation. As the sun sets on the era of the old capos, a new and more volatile chapter begins in the Mexican underworld. The technical shift to synthetics brought the wealth of kings, but it also brought the scrutiny of 1,000 hungry eyes. He outsmarted the world for half a century, only to be outsmarted by the one person he called family. The traditional poppy fields of the Sierra Madre are vanishing, replaced by the sterile, high-output glow of industrial-scale chemicals. Fentanyl's extreme potency allows a single suitcase to hold the profit of 1,000 heroin bricks, rendering traditional border checkpoints. While El Mayo preferred the shadows of the mountains, the Chapitos built a digital fortress of opulence and high-tech manufacturing. This technological escalation forced the hand of international intelligence, leading to the most sophisticated electronic surveillance operation in modern history. The 2019 Culiacanazo proved that the syndicate could paralyze a nation-state using coordinated urban warfare and tactical communication. Diplomatic relations between the United States and Mexico froze as the hunt for the remaining Chapitos intensified across the. In the aftermath, the capture of Ovidio Guzman in 2023 signaled that the old era of immunity was. The friction between El Mayo's analog ledgers and the Chapitos' encrypted messaging apps created a fatal vulnerability in the syndicate. The ensuing internal war of September 2024 transformed the streets of Sinaloa into a fractured grid of warring factions and static. Financial analysts estimate the syndicate's forfeiture reached billions, visualized in a Brooklyn courtroom as a mountain of digital and physical assets. Joaquin's plea deal in Chicago was a calculated exit strategy, trading a lifetime of loyalty for it. The legacy of the Mayo-Chapo alliance is now a shattered archive of broken trust and a landscape scarred by synth. As new rivals like the CJNG move into the vacuum, the era of the analog narco kingpin has officially ended. The final calculation reveals that even the most sophisticated evasion tactics cannot survive the betrayal. History will remember El Mayo not for his survival but for the moment his world was undone by a single handshake. The desert continues to hide secrets, but the digital trail left by the new generation has exposed the empire. Justice is rarely a clean break, but rather a slow disintegration of power until nothing remains but a single glowing. The cycle begins again with new players. Yet the foundation of the drug trade has been irrevocably altered by synthetic. Every 90 seconds the world changes, and those who cannot adapt to the new digital reality are destined to be erased. The story of El Mayo and the Chapitos is now a closed file, a warning for those who think they can outrun the algorithm. If you want to see another story about a criminal who thought he was untouchable, check out our video on the man who spent 50 years avoiding the walls, finally found the one prison he could never escape. The wreckage of the Sinaloa Syndicate serves as a map for the next generation of hunters, and the table is empty, the players are gone, but the game continues with rules that no one fully understands. In the new world, power is not measured in territory, but in the speed and encryption of the global supply chain. El Mayo's downfall was the unavoidable cost of trust, the one vulnerability that no amount of power could ever He outsmarted the world for half a century, only to be undone by the one person he called family. The technical dragnet did not rely on luck, but on the persistent accumulation of metadata across every border crossing and transaction. While El Mayo believed in the 90-second window, modern triangulation algorithms now calculate a target's precise location in less than The agency utilized a sophisticated array of signals intelligence, capturing encrypted whispers that bypassed traditional cellular networks and landed in secure vaults. Loom methodology reveals that the friction between analog wisdom and digital recklessness created a technical loophole large enough to see. The younger generation's digital footprint was a neon sign in the dark, providing the breadcrumbs necessary to map the entire. Every encrypted message sent by the godson was a brick in the wall of the trap, meticulously logged by silent observers. By the time the meeting was scheduled, the perimeter was geo-fenced, ensuring that no signal or person could leave without being tagged. High-resolution optics tracked the convoy in real time, providing a level of visual confirmation that the old narco legends never thought. The technical analysis of the sedative delivery suggests a precision that required intimate knowledge of the target's habits and physical vulnerability. The flight was an illegal bypass of radar, yet it was the most watched aircraft in the world for those nights. In the aftermath, the data harvested from the godson's devices provided a roadmap to the syndicate's most guarded financial. Surveillance of the ensuing internal war captured the precise moment the machine of cohesion shattered into a dozen warring fragments. The friction within the leadership was not just personal. It was a structural collapse that intelligence agencies had predicted. The capture of El Mayo was the final variable in an equation that had been running since the late 1980s. Every shipment, every bribe, and every betrayal was eventually assigned a digital signature that could be tracked and cataloged. The surveillance hunt extended into the psychological realm, mapping the loyalties and fears of those closest to the kingpin. Even the most thorough digital scrubbing leaves behind fragments that can be reconstructed by a persistent and well-funded The hunt required a total silence of the airwaves, a technical blackout that prevented any warning from reaching the target. The surveillance hunt concludes not with a capture, but with the transformation of raw data into a definitive legal indictment. When the central node of a network is removed, the entire structure enters a state of catastrophic and unpredictable rebalance. The surveillance hunt continues even behind bars, as every word spoken in custody is another data point for the next investigation. The $4.5 billion trail was not hidden in vaults, but in a complex web of digital shadows and shell companies. The technical shift to synthetics provided the ultimate surveillance opportunity, as the precursors required a global and highly visible supply. No secret is ever truly deleted. It merely waits for the right technology to pull it back from the digital. The surveillance hunt is a cycle that never ends, as each fallen king is replaced by a new node in the global network. The story of the surveillance hunt is now a closed file, but the algorithms continue to run in the silent dark. He outsmarted the world for half a century, but he could never outrun the invisible eyes that never sleep and never forget. In August 2025, the legend of the mountains finally met the clinical reality of the American justice system inside a sterile court. Ismael El Mayo Zambada, the man who outsmarted the world for half a century, saw his power reduced to loom. Methodology reveals that his downfall was a mathematical certainty. Once the internal trust of the Sinaloa hierarchy was compromised. By December 2025, the betrayal was codified in a Chicago plea deal where Joaquin Guzman Lopez traded a godfather. The $45 billion empire didn't just fall. It was systematically liquidated into digital evidence and massive, unprecedented asset forfeitures. While the old kingpin faces a life of concrete silence, the streets he once controlled have dissolved into a chaotic power struggle. The technical shift from analog loyalty to digital treachery has permanently altered the landscape of global narcotics and the future of sin. Trust was the only variable El Mayo could not quantify, and it became the very thing that erased his entire. As the sun sets on the era of the old capos, a new, more volatile chapter begins in the shadows of mountains. If you want to see another story about a criminal who thought he was untouchable, Check out our video on the Lazarus. The final calculation of the law was not based on the weight of the gold, but on the precision of. In the digital panopticon, every secret is archived and every betrayal is replayed for eternity as a lesson in the cost of trust. The throne of the Sinaloa Syndicate is no longer a seat of power but a monument to a legacy that. The technical infrastructure of the empire was liquidated, leaving behind only the cold, hard data that led to the final checkmate. And the judgment was not just a sentence but a total extraction of the legend from the world he had controlled for so long. The story of El Mayo and the betrayal of the Chapitos is now a closed file in the archives of global. Even the most thorough digital scrubbing leaves behind fragments, tiny clues that the loom methodology can use to reconstruct. The technical dragnet was never about luck. It was about the persistent monitoring of the variables that even a legend could not control. The man who spent 50 years avoiding the walls finally found them, but they were not made of stone but of data. The logistics of the drug trade are a mathematical equation, and the capture of El Mayo was the final solved. The technical shift to synthetics provided the ultimate leverage for the Americans, forcing a confrontation that the old guard could not. The friction between El Mayo's analog ledgers and the Chapitos' digital footprint was the technical loophole that the agency exploited for years. Joaquin Guzman Lopez realized that the old rules of loyalty were a liability, and he chose to sacrifice the king. Every 90 seconds, the invisible shield of the mountains was pierced by a signal that the legend thought was his own protection. El Mayo's downfall was the unavoidable cost of trust in a world where data has replaced loyalty as the primary currency. He outsmarted the world for half a century, but he could not outsmart the inevitable calculation of time and the cost. The fall of the Sinaloa giants has not ended the trade, but has instead created a more complex and technical global. Justice is rarely a clean break, but rather a slow and methodical dismantling of the structures that once seemed completely. The desert hides many secrets, but in the era of total surveillance, even the footprints of a ghost are eventually tracked. He outsmarted the world for half a century, but he could never hide from the eye that never blinks in the digital age.